Hi, this is Troy from Playtime Engineering, and we're going to be answering some questions from social media today about the Blipblox. So our first question is from Bose. Bose asks, can I use this as a controller in FL Studio, which is Fruity Loop Studio? On second thought, I have a Fire, so I'll just wait for the VST of this to drop. I'm sorry, Bose, but currently there's no VSTs planned for the Blipblox, but the good news is that you can play the Blipblox with FL Studio or any other DAW of your choice. The Blipblox does respond to MIDI, so anything that can send MIDI, the Blipblox will respond to. So you can sequence your notes in FL Studio, and you can have them play the Blipblox. We have a question from Torka. Can this make 8-bit or lo-fi sounds? Well, Torka, you are in luck. The original Blipblox is in fact an 8-bit device, so it is ideal for making some sort of crunchy 8-bit sounds. There's a little crunch there. Interesting note that the Blipblox After Dark actually uses a different processor. It's not 8-bit, so it has a little bit more of a rich sound, so it sounds a little bit more like a traditional synthesizer. If you want those 8-bit sounds, the original white version is really the way to go. Thanks for the question. We have a question from Elliot. Hi, I have a problem with my drum section. When I make my drum edit and come back to normal, my drum preset makes some cycle and then it comes back to the standard preset. Is it possible to save the drum preset? Also, is it possible to stop the drum, then make it come on back again without changing my melody pattern? So let me tell you a little bit about the drums here. As you know, on the Blipblox, you can play the drums manually by pressing the kick and snare button. Also, when you press your sequencer select button, the drums start playing automatically. And every time you press it, it turns the drums on and off. You can also do a drum solo mode by holding down the kick drum and then pressing the sequence select button. You can also edit the drum, so you can hold down the snare button and press the randomizer here. Now you have control over the pitch and the duration of the drum sounds. So you can go back to normal mode, and then come out of drum solo mode. The After Dark also has a function where you can turn the drums on and off by holding the kick and the snare. You can still also drum solo on the After Dark. I hope that answers your question, and thanks again, Elliot, for the question. Question here from Lynn, and Lynn asks, can it sync to MIDI clock? And the answer is yes. So here we have Korg Electribe ER1. This is an old drum machine, but really you can use any device that sends a MIDI clock. So basically any drum machine, any sequencer, or any DAW software should work just fine. Go in here, we can adjust the tempo. Thanks again, Lynn, for the question. From Pablo, we have the question, I'm into this. What's the MIDI implementation like? Well, Pablo, you're in luck. The Blipblox does respond to note on and note off commands. So you can play it with an external keyboard, or a sequencer, or a DAW. Blipblox also does respond to MIDI start, stop, and sync commands, so you can synchronize it to drum machines or sequencers, and that's sort of the extent of the MIDI implementation. It does not respond to MIDI CC, so you can think of it more sort of an analog synth, where you can basically sequence out the sequence in the notes, and then you can adjust it manually using the big fun controls. Thanks for the question. From Dribblus, we have the question, does it have somewhere to plug in a headset? This is a great question. So on the original white Blipblox, since this is a device made for kids, we discourage headphone use. So the 1/4-inch output only has, it's basically a monophonic 1/4-inch output. So if you plug a headphone into it, it's only going to come out of one channel. And that's sort of by design to discourage headphone use for kids. There are special adapters you can buy that will basically take that single channel and make it a stereo. On the Blipblox After Dark, there is a stereo audio out, which can be used as a headphone output. So with the After Dark, you can plug in a stereo pair of headphones, they'll work right away. Thanks so much for the question. Drew Monkey asks, can you MIDI sync 2 units? And the answer is yes, if you have a third device that acts as the master. So if you have a master drum machine and you can send out 2 MIDI signals to it, then yes, they can be synchronized. But the problem with that is that they are playing their own built-in melodies, and all those melodies are coming off, they're in different scales. So it might sound a little chaotic to try and synchronize 2 units using the built-in sequences. If you're going to use more than 1 unit, it's best to sequence the notes in and just send the unique notes to each unit. That way you can get them into the same scale and actually make a cohesive melody out of the 2. Thanks for the question. Wagyu asks, is it drool proof or should I wear my bib? Well, Wagyu, if you think you need to wear a bib, you're welcome to, but the Blipbloxes are very durable and they were really designed to take a lot of abuse. As you can see, if you splash some juice on it or any other liquid, you can pretty easily wipe it off. Everything about it was really designed to take some abuse from kids. So go ahead, let your kids play with it, and if you want to drool on it, you're welcome to also. It should be fine. Ashish asks, what kind of amp do you need to hear the output? This is a great question. So just about any amp will work. There's a slight difference between the 2 units. On the original white one, this is a monophonic 1/4-inch out. So with this, you can go out to either a mixer or if you have a 1/4-inch to 1/8-inch adapter, you should be able to go directly into a Bluetooth speaker if you have one of those adapters. With the After Dark does have a stereo 1/4-inch out. So what we use here, we actually have these cables that basically go. It's stereo on one side, so we plug the stereo side into the Blipblox, and then out on the other side we have 2 1/4-inch monophonics. So this is basically the tip and the ring come off on 2 different things. So for the After Dark, that's really the way to go if you want to plug your After Dark into a mixer. If you want to plug it into a standard sort of Bluetooth speaker with an 1/8-inch, you'd need a stereo 1/8-inch to stereo 1/4-inch converter cable. Thanks for the question. Zachary writes, sounds amazing, but how do you create your own rhythms, melodies, loops, and sequences? That's a great question, and thank you, and thanks for the compliment. Since we don't really have the user interface on the Blipblox to get to program your own sequences in there, we provide the MIDI in port. So the Blipblox does have a MIDI in, so you can use the MIDI in to basically play your own sequences and melodies into the Blipblox. So this is really how you use the Blipblox as a real synthesizer if you want to make your own sounds. Also, the Blipblox does respond on channel 2 to drum sounds. Let's see if we can dial this up here. We're going to go MIDI select, MIDI channel 2, enter. Now you can hear that every other sound, basically, every other note plays the kick or the snare. So using those two MIDI channels, you can basically sequence every part of the Blipblox. So thanks much for the question. Rixer writes, is there a way to store the user sequences, or do you need an external sequencer to make it play sequences other than the onboard ones? By the way, how many onboard sequences does it have? Thanks for the question. So it has over 300 built-in melodies. So both the Blipblox and the Blipblox After Dark have their own bank of melodies. Each unit has a different set of melodies. So the original has 300, the After Dark has another 300 in them. But it does have that MIDI port on it. So using the MIDI port, you can play your own sequences into the device using a keyboard, a sequencer, or a DAW. So thanks for the question. Mr. Joycius writes, I love the demo. Well, thank you very much. I'm really considering. The question is it just MIDI note receive or also MIDI clock sent? Or at least receive clock for sync? And the answer is it does have a MIDI input port, and over that MIDI input port, you can play the Blipblox with, you can send notes into it, so you can play it with a keyboard. And it does also sync with external devices. So here we have a Korg ER1 drum machine, and we're going to send the sync out of this into the Blipblox, and you can hear how the Blipblox instantly synchronizes to this drum machine. You'll also hear that the Blipblox will stay perfectly synchronized with the tempo of the drum machine if you change the tempo. Thanks a lot for the question. Rolf asks, what's about to put this funny thing into a musical context? Clock, BPM, pitch, scales? So if I understand your question right, I think you're sort of wondering, is it really a musical instrument? And the answer is yes. So here we have the Blipblox connected to a MIDI keyboard. So you can hear that it stays very much in tune with actual musical notes. So you can make really crazy sounds. But these are still musical. So they're still in tune. So even with these crazy sounds, they're still a frequency locked to the notes. So it's not just a funny noisemaker, it really is a musical instrument, and you can use it, you can really use any of the sounds on a track, and it plays well with other musical devices too. So thanks a lot for the question. Brainsplosion writes, can you use the Blipblox with an analog CV controller? Thanks for the question. Unfortunately, no, there's no way to get analog CV voltages in or out of the Blipblox, but we do provide that MIDI input. So the MIDI input's really a much more standardized interface that much more people have access to. So you can always just plug in your Blipblox with the MIDI and play it with a keyboard or a sequencer or a DAW. Thanks again for the question.